We're ready to go.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So thank you for joining us today. This is our one of our Huntington University's Forrester Forum events. HU has created this online series to continue networking in the community and providing avenues for learning and discussing important topics together. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Shoshana Hernandez, and I'm the director of the Institute for TESOL Studies, and also faculty in our education department here at Huntington University. And I'm really glad that all of you have joined us today. I know you all have busy schedules, so thank you for being here. I'm also joined by our coordinator of recruitment, Heather Dye, and also our director of graduate and adult admissions, Nathan Hawkins. So they'll be helping me keep up with your comments and questions from the chat. And let me see here. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically just kind of tell you what our topic is for today, and then also introduce our panel, and then we'll get started. So today our event is going to discuss insights into going beyond the classroom to build bridges and encourage community, specifically for our English learner students and families. So we're delighted to invite our guest panelists who actually have all completed their EL certification for licensure with Huntington University and are all from East Noble County Schools. So I'll introduce them or let them introduce themselves here in just a minute. But just a few kind of housekeeping things during our discussion. Our audience will remain muted until we open it up for questions at the end. And so please use our chat feature if you want to ask questions or make comments. Feel free to chat with each other there as we're talking. And for those who wish to share, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat or offer a helpful tip if you have one of those. So we'll begin with our panelists sharing their own experiences. I'm going to ask them a few questions about their experiences with their communities and EL families and students. And then following their discussion, we'll address some of your questions more specifically from the chat. And also just know that this presentation will be recorded so that we can have it for future use. So thank you all for joining. Also, before I forget to mention this, for those of you who might be interested in those professional growth points, if you'll contact us after, actually we'll have a list of those who have registered. So everyone who's registered and participated, we can send you a certificate so that you get credit for that. And if you are watching this as a recording and didn't register or attend live, then just contact us and we can also make sure that you get that certification. So I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves, and maybe if you can just kind of share where you are. I've mentioned that you're all from East Noble, but maybe what your specific role is and anything else that you would like for us to know about you before we get started. So maybe Heather can begin.
Well, hello, I'm Heather Green. I'm the principal at Rome City Elementary School, obviously with East Noble School Corporation. I have a K through 5th grade building. My population here is primarily, we have a lot of English students, obviously, but my big English language learner population are Arabic. They're from Yemen. So about 1/3 of our building is a Yemen population from Arabic.
Great. Becky?
Hi, I'm Becky Essig. I am the Federal Program Administrator for East Noble. So I am involved in Title III, NESP, along with Title I, and also serve as Dean of Students at Rome City Elementary School. My involvement obviously is at the district level, and Heather has already talked about our Arabic population, and then those are mostly our lowest levels, our 1s and 2s and 3s. We do have a Hispanic population. Those kids come in as level 1s in kindergarten, but they move pretty fast. So usually by the time that those kiddos are in 4th or 5th grade, they're fluent. Where our Arabic population, we get those kids anywhere from kindergarten, and then we even get seniors at a level 1 brand new to the country. So that's pretty much our district population.
Great. Thank you. Jen?
Hi there. I'm Jen Wells, and I am the high school ESL teacher at East Noble High School. Right now, I actually teach about 27 to 30 students through the course of the day, English. I have one student who got here last week from Yemen. So I have everywhere from level 1s all the way to level 3.5. The level 3.5, we provide them services, but they don't actually take the class anymore. They just come and work with me when they need me. But I have a background in foreign language. My original degree was in French, so jumping in and taking an ESL program was pretty rewarding because it's a lot like teaching a French class, but English instead. So I'm getting to use a lot of my former concepts now with my newcomers, but it's pretty interesting. It's enjoyable.
Great. Thank you. So when we decided on this topic and felt like it would be meaningful to have this conversation about kind of going beyond the classroom, building bridges, crossing bridges, and building that community outside of our classroom. Honestly, these three ladies are the first ones that I thought of because I've worked with that corporation for a while now, and I know that they do a lot very intentionally. So that's why they're here today. I'm sure a lot of you that are joining us live or maybe watching the recording are doing a lot as well. So that's why for those of you that are live, if you want to use that chat feature to share, that would be great so we can all learn from each other. But for our panel, the first question I would like you to answer, and for each of these questions, you can all answer, you can pass on a question, whatever. I'm sure you all have insights, but first, if you could just start by telling us, maybe giving us some examples of what you do intentionally to communicate with families and students, specifically from diverse backgrounds and languages. Anybody can jump in.
I don't mind talking. So I have made it a habit of getting in touch with my parents. I have a Google Voice account, and I text back and forth with many of them frequently. That's the easiest way to reach them. A lot of them work second shift, so I do have to give up some of my time in the evenings or off school time because some of them can't communicate with me at this time because they're working first shift or some of them are working second. So time is a little issue sometimes, but I do make it a habit to get in touch with them that way. I feel that it really helps kind of make them realize that we are really invested in their kids and we want to make sure their students are doing well. I've also gotten the principal and the assistant principals, and sometimes we've pulled parents in and invited them to come to school. Especially lately, we've been having some discipline issues. We've noticed that a lot of the kids, when they left in the spring, have come back to us and they've lost some of their skills, some of their language skills, some of their discipline. We have to kind of reteach a lot of things, so we've had to get really involved with the parents this trimester so far. But a lot of communication, contact, letting them know that we are really invested in what their kids are doing and that what their kids need to do to be successful. So that's really what we're doing at the high school level.
Okay, great.
So at the elementary level, we do all different kinds of things. So a lot of times the moms come in, but they do not speak very much Arab. They do not speak very much English. So the moms will come in, but they'll be very quiet, and they kind of don't want to really be seen, but they know they're supposed to come in. So we have a translator that we hired that does speak Arabic. She actually just so happens to be an East Noble graduate, and so we were lucky enough to find her. And she's been helping build that bridge with us. But she also helps us build the bridge with the mosque. So, which is a huge, huge thing because they are all about their culture. And, you know, the Quran is a big deal to them. And so just understanding them and understanding a little bit more about their background, and then showing them that I respect that background through our translator, or asking them questions. We do give them time to pray if they ask, because I cannot tell them they cannot pray, but it just can't be organized prayer. So that is a huge respect level, that we acknowledge all different kinds of cultures here and all different religions. So I have a teacher that's Jewish now, we just kind of all share that we all come from different backgrounds. A lot of times, if I'm not sure if we are offending them or if it's something that they believe in, I will ask the parents, which they appreciate that. We do a lot of home visits. Becky and I both go to the homes, and the kids literally will flock towards us. And I have one of them calling me right now. The kids will literally just flock towards us. We go straight to one of the apartment complex, and the middle schoolers that know us come out, the high schoolers that know us, they come out. The little ones just come, and as soon as the moms see that their kids are hugging us and talking to us, they try to feed us, they try to give us anything they can. And so building that bridge with them, that we are just like them and we really do care, helps with that parent background. Another thing that we do, I just had a Skype call from one of them, is that we are available really 24/7. If they really want to get a hold of us, they can communicate through Skype. And a lot of times, especially when we were quarantined last year, the moms, we would get on Skype and the moms would ask to speak with us, and the kids would go away, and the moms would be like, I need help, you know, and just communicating with the moms, saying it's going to be okay, put them back on, and I'll tell them that they're to listen to you. And just being there for the parent, and using our translator a lot, but just also the biggest thing is acknowledging them and their culture. Mm-hmm. Just ignoring it is not going to help build relationships.
And I think the key to wrap up what the two ladies said was just have flexibility and accessibility, because it's not going to be within school hours all the time, and you're going to have to go to them. You go meet them wherever they need to meet. And I mean, we pick parents up, we take them to meetings. So it doesn't all happen within those school hours, and just the willingness to have to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Jen, you want to add something else?
Yeah, sorry, the mute thing. Okay, so we actually went to the mosque one year. We were having some discipline issues, and we went to the mosque, but I've learned that that was not probably the best way to handle it. Going to the mosque was interesting, and they appreciated us coming and talking to them and stuff like that, but we found that communicating with individual families is better than going to everybody. But we did get some really nice contacts at the mosque, and we did learn some things about the culture that we didn't know. And like Heather said, I'm finding that if we address their culture and we appreciate it, then we do have a lot of more positive attitude and better behavior out of the kids. So it's a lot better, I think, being able to show them that we appreciate what they're doing and what their culture is and respect that.
Yeah, that's really great. And I think one thing that just sticks out to me that you said that I think is really important is acknowledgement, right? And kind of acknowledging, hey, we're different, these are different backgrounds, and being willing to ask, right? And saying, I don't know, teach me, help me to understand what's offensive, what's not, because I want to learn and I want to know. And so I think they appreciate that. So before we go further, because I do have a question later about the bilingual assistance and bilingual help. But Heather, since you brought that up, maybe we can talk for a minute about that. How do you utilize, because I know throughout your district you have a few bilingual assistants or bilingual people that help you. How do you utilize those people? Let's start with that question. What are some things that they help you do?
Okay, so we actually have two Arabic translators. One actually started out primarily at Rome City, because when all the Yemen kids started coming this way, most of the program started here primarily because we had the bigger amount, the larger amount of ESL students. So our one translator did really well, but she wasn't necessarily from their mosque. So there's different areas of the culture. And so she is Muslim, but wasn't from that same group. So we worked okay, and it was fine. But once I hired someone that was in their group, that changed the whole perspective differently. And so one of the things that we utilize them for is, so our translators help translate letters a lot to our parents. If there's an emergency or a situation, she'll either go with us to the home, or she will call, or she texts a lot of them. When we have kindergarten roundup nights, we have her come and we try to group our kids together so that whatever I say or whatever the presenter is saying or whatever activity it is, then they can rotate. If she's not available, then we, a lot of times, will have the older kids help translate for their parents. We utilize her for conferences. So parents can request her to be at a conference, or we can request for her to show up at a conference that we think a child may be telling the parent the wrong Arabic information. Because, some of the older kids try to pull a fast one. So we utilize her that way, but she actually has an early childhood degree. So we use her to actually teach groups to our kids as well. So she teaches our English kids what we call level literacy intervention. So she teaches that just like a normal instructional assistant would, because she's considered an instructional assistant. And as we need her for additional things, we pull her in, because we don't want her to be speaking a lot of Arabic to those kids. We want her to teach us about the culture. We want her to pull it in when we need it, but we want them also to learn English. And that's the message the parents have given us too, is we want them to learn English as much as possible and use her as a resource if needed.
I think that's great, because go ahead, Becky.
I was just gonna say, a lot of informal communication. I mean, she texts a lot, reminding them of appointments and things. We also, they also go to doctor's appointments, or, if they need someone to translate or do things, in the community to help with translation, attend meetings and that kind of thing with them.
A lot of our families do not answer the phone because they know most likely it's somebody who speaks English. So that's where Dola, our translator is Dola, she comes in handy for that, because she'll text and say, hey, the school's been trying to call, or hey, I need you to answer the phone because Mrs. Green is calling. Because a lot of times their mailbox is full, or they don't have a mailbox. So she comes in handy for that.
Yeah.
Jen, you want to talk a little bit about secondary?
We have a very different scenario. With the secondary level, I actually sit with our guidance counselors and try to push the kids that are low into the same class. So, for example, all of my newcomers are together through the day. And my TA pretty much spends most of her time with those kids. I do have her going into a couple of other classes where, she's in math classes a lot and science classes. She's in English classes. Sometimes she goes between two. So she'll go to the beginning of one class when the teacher's doing the instruction, explain to the student what he needs to do, and then go to another class and finalize, wrap up, because she's really good at math. So she usually ends up ending the day in math class, because she can sit down with the kids and just do basic definitions and instruction to them. But she's very much of a push-in into different places. She does come to my first period class because I have the 3 newcomers and I try to spend more time working with them. So she'll work with the kids that are in the room that normally I would be able to work with one-on-one or in small group, because I'm trying to get those newcomers to start learning vocabulary and start speaking. So the days that I have her, she's usually doing what I would normally do in a regular, if I didn't have her, and that's roaming around the room, sitting with kids, answering questions, going over things. That's just how it worked out that I needed her in that class for that reason. But she does spend a lot of time with my newcomers and my really low students.
That's great. So, and that's good to hear how it works differently in different levels. But for those who, and we've got a couple questions in the chat that I'm going to address in just a minute, but before we move away from this topic, for those who may be joining us who don't have those bilingual resources, or maybe don't have a person who can push in or can help in some of those ways, what kind of encouragement would you give them, or what suggestions would you give them, kind of maybe thinking back to before you had that resource? How could you encourage those people?
So I actually, before working for East Noble, worked for a different district, and I worked for East Allen County Schools, and we had Catholic Charities brought in a bunch of kids from Yemen, and we didn't know anything, had no translators, nothing. And so then when I came here to East Noble, and how we ended up with our certification was I applied for a grant with the state to send several of my teachers to college to get their certification, and then we reached out to you guys. So we did get the grant, and the very first book that Shoshana, you gave us was this particular book. And this one here, so I had been working between East Allen and here for 6 years with kids that were Muslim and had no clue about their background, didn't even have translators that could explain things. Soon as we got this book, it was a super quick read. I apologized to my translator because I felt bad, because that's the big key, is know the culture you're working with. Whether you can speak that language or not, there's so many hidden other things. Like trying to shake one of the guys, trying to shake the dad's hands. And then he wouldn't shake my hand. I was like, well, he's in America. He should be shaking my hand, and that I should have been shamed on that, and just the way they eat, the way they pray. I should have been tuned into those things. So even without a translator, getting to know the culture more. But there's also a lot of apps out there. And if now most districts are one-to-one, you can just type into Google Translate. Even with some of our, like when we get 5th graders that are level 1s that can barely speak any English, we will just type in English and it will come out in their language. And if they can read it, then they start communicating us that way instead of having to rely on someone else. So there's lots of computer programs that you can use too to try to connect with that kid. But another big mistake that we used to do without a translator, and that teachers didn't know anything other, would be just to kind of ignore that kid because they didn't know exactly what to say to them. And so just acknowledging the kid, the child, and acknowledging the parents, not to ignore them because they do not speak English. Still try to say hi and hello and smile at them, because those are universal things they are aware of.
When I started at East Noble, we had only one ESL instructional assistant. So we now have 4 ESL certified teachers that are teaching those kids, along with 3 Arabic teaching assistants. So we've grown. So you just have to be patient wherever you're at, or if you're starting brand new, and you have to have admin buy-in from the top level down. So you definitely have to have your superintendents, assistant superintendents, building principals see the urgency of having these people on board, so that they can fill the roles, because I don't know how we could survive without our Arabic translators, just because it's so different than even Spanish.
Yeah, it's very, very much so. And one of the other things I would, when Heather was mentioning some of the apps, Microsoft has actually released a new version of Edge, and we have forced all of our newcomers to use it, because if you right click, it'll automatically translate the entire page into Arabic for them, or Thai or Filipino or whatever language the kids have. So they complain a little bit that it's not the right Arabic, but it does get the point across enough that they can do things. And Microsoft has done a really good job making all of their platforms translatable, so you can do that. We started actually translating all of the novels and all of the texts that we're reading in class into Arabic for those lower folks. And we're finding that the kids are actually doing their work. They're trying to get involved. Even though it's not in English, they're still trying. because some of them, they can read their language perfectly. They're very fluent in their own language, but when it comes to English, they've been here for a week. They've been here for a month. We have one who got here 2 days before we closed and came to school, got his laptop, learned how to turn it on, took the WIDA test, and then we closed. So it was like, you know, he never really got a chance to learn any English at all. So, you know, using that has been really helpful. I also have encouraged the kids to turn on the little translator app that's built into the computer from Microsoft and press the voice recorder and put it close to their teacher. I've requested the teachers to do preferential seating by them so the kids can actually have it come up and it'll type what the teacher says, but then it'll flip the screen and translate it into Arabic for them so they can actually read what's going on. Because some of the teachers do talk really fast and some gen ed kids can't keep up. So just trying to imagine doing that. So the kids are getting trained to use the tools, and the teachers are also getting trained to use the tools, and they're being instructed frequently. Like I'll send little messages out saying, hey, you know, this is a really cool app you can try. You might want to show this to the kids, or the student has been shown this. Don't let them tell you they don't understand because they can use it. And I think that's helped a lot.
That's great. I want to address just a few questions in the chat related to home visits. So in your interaction with parents and families outside of class, 2 questions. One is, what do you do on those home visits? And another one is, how has COVID and social distancing and all of that affected that practice? So maybe start by telling us what you would normally do in those visits, and then how you're adjusting that this semester.
Well, it varies on what we do, definitely. Since COVID, we did, like I spent a lot of time this summer taking work to students. Specifically, we had a brand new Arabic deaf student that started. So trying to coordinate hearing testing and taking work and getting them set up to where he could do stuff at home. We did some assessments this summer with the kids. So we pulled them aside and did some screenings with them and worked with them just in groups. Sometimes we just go to say hi. We participated in taking them lunches. So, I mean, it's all across the board. A lot of it, you know, has work related. Some of it is building relationships. So.
Yeah, we know that a lot of the students, so one of the things is once they start speaking English, especially the little ones, and you get them on a Skype meeting or a Google Meets meeting, the taking turns part of the language does not come out quite easily, especially for the littles. So like when you get on with several of them, they're all trying to talk, you know, and so just going in person and having them take turns, then plus having a tangible book in front of them. So one of the things that Becky and I did is we'd go and we'd deliver them lunches just to say hi, and then we would sit down with them and read. And yes, we know it was quarantine and we know it was COVID, but you know, we sometimes have to break the rules to make, you know, we broke some rules to make it happen. We wore masks. You know, sometimes they don't understand social distance. So at that time they didn't, they do now because they're in school, but it also gives us an opportunity to meet the other little kids that are in the home. So there's a lot of preschoolers there that they just sit down and they'll start reading with us. And it's all about just building those relationships.
That's great. Let me ask specifically, because one of the questions that's come up in the chat as well is about apps and how Google Translate, you mentioned, may not be the correct form of Arabic or other languages. Are there, besides Microsoft, because I know Microsoft has some great tools for Translate, and I know that you all use that, are there any other apps that you use or that you know of, either to translate or maybe to communicate, that you would use to communicate with parents?
My kids prefer Google Translate over Microsoft because you can actually select the region. I did find yesterday that the Microsoft has an African form of Arabic and a Saudi Arabian form, and the Saudi Arabian form is a lot closer to Yemen. So I showed that to a couple of the kids, and they were pleased that they could do that. But I don't even remember how I found it. It just popped up. But the kids try to use their phones. A couple of them have apps on their phones where they can take a picture of a PDF and it'll transfer it right into Arabic for them, but they're not allowed to have their phones at school. It's highly discouraged at the high school, and we had to stop that. So they pretty much have to rely on their computers for everything.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So for us, literally, we try all different kinds of things because sometimes we like to try to go with free apps a lot, and it just depends on the grade and what that kid needs within that level.
Mm-hmm.
So for the lower grades, what I suggest, because we change all the time because things update all the time. So if you literally if you're on an iOS device and you type in ESL, there's a whole list of different things. So it depends if you're looking for translating or are you looking for tools to help you with actually teaching the English language.
Mm-hmm.
So we tend not to do as much translating because especially at the littler level, they can learn the language and English a lot faster if they hear us.
Mm-hmm.
So, but we might have a fifth grader that we need to use it. But a lot of our kids that come to us can't read their native language.
Mm-hmm.
So they can understand it if they can listen to the piece, but they can't necessarily read it.
Mm-hmm.
So if we do type something in there in English and it comes out in Arabic, it has to be able to read that out loud to them, not just for them to be able to see it, because like I said, most of them can't read English or read their language. But we use different kinds of apps that has just a picture and that will say, like, if there's a picture of an apple, it will say apple. And then there's all different kinds. If you literally just get on your device and type in ESL apps. But what I also suggest is if you're a Facebook person or a Twitter person, even if you are a Pinterest person, if you type in English as a second language, you would be surprised at all the different support groups that are out there. And so a lot of the things that I learn about, and I know Becky will come in and say, hey, I was on this thing on Facebook. Did you see this from this support group? We learn about all those apps and different pieces of technology and just different things to try with our kids through a lot of those things out in social media.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let me ask you a question. Thank you for those answers. And I think before I move on, actually, I should say I appreciate seeing how you use that translation piece in the classroom, but also outside the classroom, and most importantly, in building those relationships and doing things like conferences with your bilingual assistants, because I think sometimes we tend to think that if I just had a translator, if I just had someone here who could translate for me, that all my problems would be solved. But it really is a matter of using all of those other supports, and translation isn't always the end all and be all. And one comment in the chat, Talking Points, that's a program that I was thinking of too, Rondi. That is, I've heard of schools using that to communicate back and forth with families and parents. So that might be something for you all for some of you that are looking for those to explore. So let me ask, before we get away from the home visits, because I think this is interesting to those who are listening, how did you start that? Did you just show up one day? Did you call and tell them you were coming? Is it kind of like making cold calls and you get the door slammed in your face? You know, for someone who's never done that before, maybe can you talk a little bit about what that first home visit was like and how you started that?
So I was Ruby Payne trained, which she deals a lot with poverty.
Mm-hmm.
And just seeing home life is the biggest thing, and being able to start relating to them. Yeah. And letting the kids see you outside so they don't think I live at the school. It was never something that I even doubted doing. We started off, like, when I first came to Rome City, it was, hey, who wants to take a walk through the neighborhood after school? And teachers would just say, oh, let's take a walk. And then we'd start waving to kids as we'd walk. It wasn't just about the ESL. It was just about, let's go out in the community. The kids need to see us out here, and let's start meeting the parents. And parents would come up talking to us. When we ended up with the Arabic, so with our English as a second language kids, we would literally go to the apartments where a lot of them are, and we just start walking, and then they would come out, and then the parents would see them with us. We always go in groups.
Mhm.
So we never go by ourselves. There'll be a random time here and there where I might, just because I know the families well enough now. I know that it's safe. I know that it's going to be okay. But we also we have a school resource officer that we will take with us too, because we want them to feel safe with him too. We applied for another grant through Dollar General a couple years ago. And the big one was for us we didn't want to lose that language barrier in the summer, because we noticed when they leave us in the summer and come back, then their language is it's worse or choppy. So we applied for another grant, and our goal was to just go to visit them, sit down and read a book with them, give them some lunch, and then we'd also make a little arts craft with them. And so that really helped us build more and more relationships with the moms. Then we started to figure out who the leader of the moms were. So those were, once we started doing that, we started to get more of a relationship there with them. But it does we have some staff members that are just not comfortable with going to the homes. And that's just something that, as a principal, I just have to accept that. That's okay. I'll go to the home for you. Just let me know what you need me to share. And so we love going to the homes. Becky and I love it. And just seeing the kids in their own element, and they're excited.
And we tagged this summer, also tagged with food drop off. So because of COVID. So if you want to start small and not like go door to door, you could tag with another group or somebody else that's just going into the community for whatever reason, and then you start building those relationships where you feel comfortable that you can go do those more smaller visits. But just showing up with the school bus that had the lunches and helping hand out those lunches is just another way that you can at least get your face out there and those parents start to recognize you.
Yeah, that's great. I think those are some great tips. So going with other people, and maybe something casual, like you said, taking a walk, maybe in a part of town that you wouldn't normally walk in, just to get that familiarity and get your face out there. I think that's great. So maybe if some of you, each of you, think of maybe one kind of success story or one example, maybe something that you haven't shared with us yet, of a time that you did something outside of the classroom to build a bridge or communicate in some way that had impact inside the classroom. So something you did outside that directly had an impact inside.
Well, I'll just talk a little bit more about our new Arabic deaf boy that we have. He's a middle schooler, and just building that relationship with that family this summer, dropping off work for him, communicating with the classroom teachers and helping with him getting his work, and then trying to get him, because it was during COVID, so we could not get him in for testing. So we couldn't really give him services until that was done this fall. I went to his case conference last week, and that's how long it's taken to get him qualified. And we finally have, at the beginning of the year, he has a deaf interpreter that's with him every single day. And to see them communicate, because he had no one, and to see, because he's Arabic and he's deaf, so to see them communicate and him have a relationship with someone was very touching. I actually brought tears to my eyes during the case conference to see that he finally had someone that he could communicate with. So
that's great.
So I'm a frequent Kroger goer, and a lot of our parents shop there. So I have a habit of just stopping and talking to them when I'm shopping, because a lot of them know who I am. They recognize me. A couple of my students have been with them, and I've stopped and started talking to the students, and I'm like, why don't you introduce me? Tell me who this is. And the student will introduce me or whatever. And I had one boy that was kind of a stinker and was causing a lot of trouble in class. And I met his mom at the grocery one day. They go all the time when I do. It seems like we're there always at the same time, but she recognizes me now, and his behavior has been a little better since I've seen that, since I've talked to her, because she doesn't understand what I say. She speaks no English, but she recognizes who I am, and Like I'll see her and I'll be like, hello, how are you? And that's all I need to say. And she can say that back and we're good. But I feel that that connection there, she's made that little bit of a connection with me, and he realizes it as well. So I feel that's helped.
Yeah, that's great.
I would say a big breakthrough that we had with several teachers here was maybe about 3-4 years ago now, maybe a little longer than that. After reading the book, we wanted to get to know them a little bit more. And so I sat down with the translator and said, we want the moms to come in. Can you bring the moms in? And we want to get to know them better. You can translate for us. And she came back and said, well, the moms want to get to know you guys. Will you come to us? And so we said, yeah, we'll come to you. And she said, but no men are allowed, because they wanted to teach us about their culture and their dance and their weddings and all this stuff. So they rented out one of their apartment complex clubhouses, and a bunch of the teachers, we went there on a Saturday night, and it was a huge party, and they made so much food for us, and they talked to us about their culture and their belief, and they had us dance with them, which they're not allowed to dance in public, sprayed all this perfume in our hair and on us, and had us put their headdresses on, and they took pictures of us galore and shared them all with their kids. And then they told their kids, you know, you listen to them, you know, they are our friends. And so once we did that, the whole level of respect was different. The kids would walk in that next week and they're like, you were with my mom. We know you were with my mom. And we even had one of the heads of the mosque come in, and he presented us with an award, and thanked us for actually looking at them as a culture. And then he took a picture of me with the award, and they hung it at the mosque and told them that you listen to her and follow her rules. And that was just a huge, huge breakthrough, that because we went and participated and wanted to learn about them and wanted to see them in a different light so that we could respect them. Now the kids, to be quite honest, we do not have hardly any discipline issues with our Arabic kids. It did not used to be that. It did not used to be that way. Now when we say we're going to call your mom and dad, they're like, no, don't, you know, because they know, they trust us now. And it didn't used to be that way.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And just that, again, that acknowledgement, that value, and just, you know, putting everyone kind of on the same equal playing field builds that mutual respect. That's great. So another question for all of you. Each of you have your EL coursework, your certification, and one of the things we wanted to talk about in this group today is kind of how TESOL, the field of TESOL, and having some of that knowledge builds that bridge. So can you think of anything maybe from your coursework or things that you've learned specifically about second language learning, or something from your certification coursework specifically that really helped you in this area of communication and building bridges with the community?
I really think a lot of it has to go along with the cultural understanding. In the last class I took, the one that Shoshana didn't teach, it was all about culture and building an understanding of culture. And it was definitely important, I feel, because, you know, we talked about realizing that, you know, this is how it's handled in that culture, but in this culture it's not. So you need to accept it, that they're not going to necessarily do it this way. And that's what I feel was really valuable, was that, I mean, that class was a lot different than just learning the pedagogy and learning how to teach this class and how to teach listening and how to teach speaking, but it was also about kind of diving into culture a little bit. And what I really liked about that class is we actually had to interview somebody who is from a different culture, and I got a chance to talk to my TA. I interviewed her on one of our COVID days. We had to come to school for a week, and she sat in my room, and she was translating all of these vocabulary cards into Arabic And while she was doing that, I sat there and interviewed her, and I learned so much about her. I learned things about her and her family and her culture and where she came from, because she's from Chad. She's not from Yemen, but she taught me so much stuff I didn't know. And I was able to go back the next day and just be like, I was just wowed by talking to her. So that was really cool.
That's awesome.
And although I don't teach, you learn so many strategies about how things you can practically, that you can take back to the classroom and do, that you can just walk out of the class and do that. And you put things together that as a group, we did our certification, we did an entire building. We had we had 12 teachers, 10 teachers, yeah, two administrators that did it together. So we did a lot of things as a group that we could take back to the building and implement. So it gives you a lot of time that you don't have to be able to do those things and take practical strategies back that you can actually use.
So I would say there was a couple big takeaways, and one thing that I remind our staff a lot is the kids like to try to teach us their language, and Arabic is really hard. There's like 37 different dialects within that language. And one of the big things that I remember reading, and I don't remember which one of the classes it was that when you're littler, you learn, you can hear the different sounds. But as you get older, you might not be able to hear all the sounds in all the languages. And that was something that stuck out to me, because I struggle with listening to pronounce some of that. And what they say versus what I say, they're like, no, you didn't say all the sounds right, you know? And so just remembering that as you get older, it does get harder to learn different languages. But I would agree with Jen, the biggest piece of the whole thing is the culture. Because just understanding and respecting them will help you be able to get a lot farther with them if they see that you see them as an individual and that you respect them as an English student, but also as a student that doesn't speak English all the time.
Yeah, and maybe, so there's a question in the chat that might be interesting, because all of you work with predominantly Arabic speakers. I know you have a few Hispanic learners in your district as well. It is a very different culture, and I remember specifically working with some of your teachers in the certification, and even the textbooks and some of the stuff we would read. You guys would say, gosh, this is all about Hispanic learners, and our students are so different. A lot of the literature that's written is about Hispanic learners, because that's so much of what we see here in the US. But your experience in East Noble is so different. So do you have any experience with Hispanic learners, and maybe you can speak a little bit to that and how it's different, and maybe your approach to working with those students, how it might be different than your Arabic speakers?
Our Hispanic population is, in our county anyway, is third, fourth generational. That they've been in the community, they work. They don't move in as a level one. So our parents most of them are fluent English speakers. So we don't have the same challenges. We may get some kindergartners that come in that don't speak any English. But again, they move quickly, as I said before. So we just don't have the same challenges or urgency with the Hispanic population, because they're so embedded in the community, and most of them are English speakers.
So as a teacher, I have lots of experience with Hispanic. So back when the ESL programs first were established, I was actually a classroom teacher. Before all this Arabic and Yemen started coming in, we primarily had all Hispanic, and that's who would come in the room. It was different, especially as a teacher. So when I left the class, when I first was in teaching and they started bringing in English as a second language, it was all Hispanic. And then it started moving in with the Arabic kids coming in from Catholic Charities. It was quite different with the different cultures, but as far as the languages, it's a lot harder with the Arabic. But with the Hispanic, what I found is I took several years of Spanish. So it was easy for me to say things like the prepositions and get them to understand what all the different, like the different prepositions, and I taught kindergarten for 8 to 10 years. So with that, I would speak things in English and some things in Spanish until they started to learn it. So it was a lot easier with Spanish kids. Plus with the parents, you know how there's the Spanglish, where there's Spanish and English, and a lot of the Spanish words can be translated into English. So, and they're familiar with that. So for me as a teacher, from teaching both different kinds, it was always easier for me for the Hispanic because I had more of a background. But if somebody took French for many years versus Spanish, I could see the struggle there. But for me, I always thought it was a lot easier because I had the background knowledge.
Yeah, that's great to know. And I would just say, I think from having a little experience working with other cultures, even beyond Arabic and Hispanic, I think what you all have said about, some of those strategies are going to work no matter what the culture and language background is. Some of those things in the classroom are going to work. In terms of communication and building that community aspect, I think culture is still, where you want to put your focus and learning about that. And so whatever that looks like, reading books, going to some local events or getting to know the community in that way. And I think learning about the culture that those students come from, I think, is where the key is. So I think before we open it up to the other attendees to ask any other questions that they have, anyone on the panel have any last things to say before we open it?
I just had one quick thing that went back to translating that I was thinking about is if you're familiar with Some More, the newsletter, you can put literally anything in there, newsletters, invites, whatever. But at the very bottom, if you have a subscription to Some More, at the very bottom of it, there's a translate button, and it translates in all different languages. So we use that here, and believe it or not, it does translate in Arabic, but we do have some Spanish, and so they could translate it in Spanish if they wanted to also. So that's another option if people are interested. And if you have more than one language in your building, that program has several languages at the bottom. You just type it in English, you submit it, you can upload it, but at the very bottom, the families can scroll to the language they want.
That's a great tip.
And I think teaching your kids to be advocates for themselves, and I think Jen can probably talk on this a little bit more, especially at the secondary level, because they're spread so far between so many different teachers that they come in contact with, and everybody's not on board as far as, wanting to be an advocate for those kids. So you really need to teach those kids, especially at the middle school and high school level, how to advocate for themselves and get the modifications, accommodations, and things, and make sure that they understand what they're allowed and how to ask a teacher for those things.
Yeah, I've worked really hard to get the kids to understand that, because they will come to me and they'll say, I need you to email so-and-so and ask them. And I'm like, no, you will email so-and-so and I will help you write the email. Because I need them to understand that someday down the line, I'm not going to be there for them. They're going to be graduated and they're going to be on their own and they're going to have to figure it out. So we work with that. We've talked about writing emails, how to be polite, some of the social interactions that we are used to doing in English that they're not used to doing because they, the demands and stuff. But we've worked really hard to do that. And the kids are starting to realize that I'm not going to send the email for them. I sometimes will send an email, but they don't know I've done it, just to say, so-and-so is going to be talking to you about this assignment. Would you please let me know that they came to you and that it's been handled, because I am working with this student about doing it on their own. And usually they figure it out, and they do. And we're starting to get some of them to talk more. I have a couple of girls that are very shy, One of them talks so low. The teacher came to me the other day and said, I can't understand anything she says to me. She's so quiet. I just can't hear her. And the masks don't help. So, you know, I told him, I said, we need to figure something out with this. So I sat with her. We talked a little bit. I kind of told her some things I needed her to try to do, to talk a little louder, raise her voice a little bit. You know, I reminded her she's in a mask. And, you know, he hasn't really said anything that she's not as easy to understand. So we've been trying to work with that kind of stuff too. But the whole self-advocacy thing is really important, and it really needs to be stressed constantly.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we have just a few minutes left. If anyone who is attending has a question, if you'd like to turn on your mic, unmute yourself and ask the question. We have a few minutes, we can take those. All right, well, while you're thinking, let me share my screen really quickly. I would be remiss if I didn't share a little bit about the programs that we have to offer at Huntington University if you're interested. So let me just quickly pull this up, and then while you're thinking of a question that you may want to ask, I'll just let you know some of the programs that we have at the university. So obviously we offer TESOL courses for your own personal development, also for licensing and renewal. We have the full certification for licensing. We do professional development, and we also have 2 separate master's degrees. We also have some specific programs, partnership discounts, for example, with Region 8 schools and a lot of other organizations. So if you're interested in that, you can inquire. If we have anyone here who may have done our undergraduate certification and is interested in a master's degree, we also have incentives for that to make that transition from an undergraduate certification to a master's degree really seamless and easy for you. So I'll just leave those points up. The graduate at huntington.edu would be a great place for you to send those questions if you don't have time here. Or for those of you who are watching us, watching this recording, you can do that as well. But if anybody wants to turn on their mic, feel free. I'm going to ask our panel something. We've got a quiet group. Okay. All right. Well, we're almost out of time, so I don't want to cut you off if you have something to share. But if we've exhausted the topic, we can also end. So I'll give you one more chance if anybody wants to ask a question or make a comment. Okay.